Okay. Hope I can be seen. Hope can I be heard. Hey, Derek, man. Uh, yeah, I only heard very briefly about Pinkertons. I mean, what are we in the uh I don't even know, the New Mexico territory in 1895? I don't know. I know the company's still around, but it's hard to think of hard to think of the name Pinkertons and not think of Jesse James and outlaws and all kinds of nonsense. I really don't know the details. If it comes up, well, let me switch to Reddit here. If it comes up, um, I'm happy to take a look at it. I don't know if I'm going to seek it out. Maybe I'll read it over the weekend and see if there's anything interesting to say about it. Uh, I, uh, I did hear some other blip. Just people are. I saw that people are creating kind of content about that. I don't know. It is what it is. I mean, corporation's going to corporate. Hey, Derek, man. Hey, Ryland. Glad everybody's trickling in. Sorry that I didn't. I gave sort of abbreviated notice. We're in my RPG Roundup tab. I suppose I should start here. I did see this last night, and we covered this, I want to say last time we did this, but there's this hex generator, and they've added roads now and settlements. And I think I mentioned before, especially now that I'm getting more into the solo gaming, I can see the I can see the need and kind of the desire to kind of create hex maps and sort of somewhat on the fly. But I feel like this to me is a better method. It just in terms of you get something has context. So I think I mentioned one of the issues you run into is if you're trying to create a hex by hex. For example, you're in this hex and you say, oh, there's a river, but then you kind of generally come out of this hex or one of these other hexes, and suddenly like the river disappears, or maybe you were kind of wrapping around and then you hit this hex and suddenly this hex has a river, but then the surrounding ones didn't have rivers, and you can kind of get some goofy things because geography isn't tiled in real life, right? It's not here and then another chunk here and another chunk here. You to me, you want to look at it more holistically, more in terms of the whole. And now I understand that for some folks, part of that solo experience, I think my impression is that part of that is a very analog experience, not digital, not plugged in. You're kind of at the table, you're doing it. I get that part. But for I think time, money, whatever, pre-generating some expanse like this, and then you don't have to know what any of this stuff is. You don't have to pre-gen all the contents if you don't want to roll it up. But then at least, you're wandering through here. Oh, look, there's a road. Where does it lead? I don't know. And it goes through here. That just seems to be easier. And something like this is just dead easy. Obviously, it's online. It's free, so you don't even need something like you might need with Worldographer or Hex Kit, where there's this not a subscription, but a one-time price. I know there are other apps that are free, but for this is nice and simple. It's not stylized. It's giving me just kind of only and exactly kind of what I want out of that, which is just the hexes and some indication of what's inside them. Ronald says, I kind of feel like they are still around because the name has such a reputation. Oh, the Pinkertons. I see. Yes. And then Ron also says interesting that the rivers follow the hex borders, but the roads don't. Yes, I like using the rivers for hex borders because I kind of feel like if it was in real life and I was doing a map on the hexes, those would be the borders that I would align my hexes on. I'm not surprised they don't with roads. This is something where I've gotten frustrated when I've tried to put roads next to rivers in something like Worldographer, and I want to follow the hex marks, but they end up putting the road kind of in the river. I think Worldographer, at least, there's not I guess an offset or something. So, but I'm fine with this. I mean, maybe ideally you might think that the road would follow the river. Here it kind of does, but of course it's swampy. So this makes sense why the road wouldn't be in the swamp, but they'd have to kind of go around the swamp and avoiding maybe this kind of rough patch of country coming along the lake. Now here's maybe where I'm surprised, given that this looks like just open grassland, why there isn't a town somewhere. I'd got to think here or here or here, or maybe all of them to do town around this lake. Of course, you can add them in if you want. And, maybe this seems like an oddity. Why do you have a whole cluster of villages around what would seem to be nothing. And what I mean by nothing is not that there's obviously there's stuff here. It's not in the void. But when you think about where you're going to build settlements, you're going to think about water and you're going to think about kind of flat grasslands and maybe forests if you're going to then turn that forests into farmland. 'Cause I think ideally, I think forest is better farmland because it's got deeper, more water, which allows trees to grow as opposed to just having grasses. But then you're going to cut it down and turn it into grassland. So why, especially if you have sort of farming area here, why there isn't a settlement here and here both, I don't know. I don't know. Oh, Ryland says it's a lake without an outlet, so it's less likely salty and less likely to be settled. That's true because here it is. If we're looking at here, it's coming down. We're assuming it's coming down from the mountains. Then yes, it does come in here. So maybe it is too salty. Maybe it is. Around this deforestation. Yeah, exactly. When taken too far, obviously it's bad. But sometimes you do have to farm. That still doesn't quite explain why this thing here is the center when there's nothing about there that seems, and it's hilly, so it's not your ideal farmland, given that you could be, say, in one of these forest hex. Now, maybe they took this forest hex so in primeval times, this was a forest hex, and now it's not. But then why are these still forests? I don't know. There's probably some things you got to clean up, and I don't know what kind of algorithm or when it's going through and deciding where to put settlements, where to put them, but still it's there. It's cool. You can turn them on or off, I presume. Yeah. Show settlements. So you can hide that if you don't want to. You can just have the roads. You can hide the roads. You can hide the borders. If you don't like the borders, these borders don't make sense to me. I would imagine, like most things. Okay. So I could see maybe why whoever this is, may have wanted to claim the mountains. I don't know. I don't know many, often you think about the mountains, other than maybe if you live in the mountains, like say Switzerland or something, but probably the mountains are your border. Maybe you claim them, but you're not really doing much up there. Okay. So first of all, I'm sorry. I will post a link to it. I'll just take out all the seed. Well, actually, I'll just, I have it in two different, I'm actually running one computer into another one, so I can't copy paste anymore. But this is on tamas-rebel.github.io/hex_world_generator. I'm gonna have to figure out how I can pass stuff across. And then this, what I'm using here is I made a multi-Reddit, and it's called RPG Roundup. You can find it by going to reddit.com/user/hexed pressman, all one word, /m/RPG Roundup, all one word, /. So that's where we are. So these borders don't really make sense because I would imagine. So first of all, I was saying, okay, maybe this culture here would claim the mountains, but I'm guessing they would probably stop at the river. Well, I suppose maybe they say, you know what, we want the river and we want the other side. I guess. I just feel like usually when you see kind of, I don't know, I think of established or old or long-lived or sort of natural state borders, they follow natural things. I'm saying natural twice. I think I mean when borders evolve over time, as opposed to the ones that colonial powers made, or in some cases like U.S. states in the Midwest into the West, where there weren't a lot of landmarks, and you just see these really flat straight lines. But other than that, you see rivers and it's the mountains. So just this kind of in the middle of the hills being a border, you can make it make sense. Maybe you think, oh, it's contested. Maybe there's something here. But just on the face of it, you'd say, well, why wouldn't they try to take all this? Or why wouldn't they stop at the river? Because it's just a natural place to kind of stop things. Same with this one. Why does this creep all the way up here, but then not have that? Why doesn't it stop maybe down here at those hills or go up? And why also doesn't it follow the river? Or what is it following when it's just cutting straight south like that? I wouldn't expect to see that on that. I would expect something that's following natural flows, or potentially mixed in with there's some super important interest that we have or something that explains why we're jutting out here. So I would expect to see something. Maybe there's a fortress out here. Maybe they have this town, or they loop out and grab this and come back in. And then we can think about why. But these are kind of just sort of Voronoi seeming kind of shapes that, why did these guys claim all this mountain? I mean, maybe practically speaking, there really stops at this borders, or maybe one in. But interesting choices. But the thing is, you don't have to use it, don't have to keep it, and you can just keep RP ground up. Yes, I've said that too, Ron. You can just keep moving along with this until you get what you want, or of course you can just remove the borders and rewrite your own borders. And of course, it's free, so there's really nothing to lose. And nice job adding new stuff. Hopefully they'll keep adding some new stuff. Oh, this might be interesting. So this is in the RPG subreddit, and in this multi-Reddit, I have a bunch of Reddits. Some of them are OSR and OSR related. Some of them are more generic, like the RPG subreddit. Some of them are a couple of them are more 5e focused in terms of content, but I like it. They're less mechanical questions than philosophical questions. So I think they're interesting, even if a lot of times you find that the questions and answers are kind of focused towards 5th edition, but I find there's often interesting things in here. Let's see what's going on in this one. And let me just don't forget to upvote it. Did I click on it? I did. So this is with the tag Table Troubles. Party member made an alternative to killing, and it caused an argument at the table. This is posted by Mountains of Cats. We're currently playing a sci-fi space game. One of the players is playing a doctor who won't kill. As a solution to this, they've started working on a gun that drugs people and makes them hallucinate, then forget the last 10 minutes. They tested the gun on another player. Like it, to see its effect, and it ended up making him go a tiny bit crazy for a bit. I personally, in and out of character, view this machine as a bit unethical, forcing hallucinations on others. I would have no problem with someone being unethical. It's a sci-fi game. It's supposed to be fun. However, they're doing it under the pretense that it's a good thing, and they're being a good person by doing it. The climax of this was last session. We found a mad scientist doctor performing experiments on prisoners, and our doctor was talking about how horrible it is. My character made a comment about it being similar to what they do. This caused a huge blowout, and they started arguing and getting loud. I have been X-carded, and I am no longer allowed to talk about the ethics of this gun. How do I move forward? Everyone seems to agree that this weapon is actually good, but me. I've apologized to the players several times. However, they still seem upset. I'm at a loss at what I should do. Any advice would be appreciated. Okay, cool. So this is from a player perspective, which is always kind of fun and nice, and not a GM point. This is really interesting because, one, I would have no problem if your character poses an ethical question. It is interesting. So on the one hand, and this could apply. Now, in this case, they're talking about a sci-fi game, but we could think of this as a spell or some kind of effect or a magical item or anything that might fit a fantasy world if you're playing in a fantasy world. In essence, is it unethical to force hallucinations or illusions on somebody, right? A mind-altering, you're basically giving them a mind-altering effect. There's a couple ways to look at it. Is it unethical in terms of just in general, right? You're walking along the street and you start shooting people with darts that make them see stuff or see things that aren't there and then forget the next 10 minutes. Yes, that would be unethical. Is it unethical when the alternative, if we're assuming the alternative is where we're killing them, then is it unethical? It's a good question. Are we at war? Are you guys, are these enemy combatants to which it's accepted in war that you're going to have to, that they may die just like you may die, right? You're in war, so the fact that combatants may die in war is something that is unfortunate, but is accepted. Hey, Phil, in that case, maybe you say it's not really unethical because instead of killing them, I'm just giving them hallucinations. I'm sort of sedating them. Now, you might say, well, why? I said sedate them, but they're not. They're giving them hallucinations. They could just sedate them, knock out gas, knock out whatever, and avoid the hallucinating part. So it's kind of, I can see both sides of it. I can see one person saying, look, you're a doctor. You don't want to kill them, but you're willing to make them think they're crazy or kind of drive them crazy for a minute. It seems against the doctor's code, right? It's not, if I'm a doctor, you're not doing no harm. If your objection to killing as a doctor was like, hey, I took an oath to do no harm, driving people crazy for 10 minutes or whatever it ends up being is doing harm. Maybe it's not, you feel like it's not permanent harm. And, in real world, I would say, well, who's to say what the long-term after effects of this thing is? But assuming that even it's just for 10 minutes, it's still, yes, as a doctor, it's still unethical. But you might think, I have to do this so I don't have to stop the other thing, which I think is infinitely worse. and that's it's an interesting decision. Now, if you're at the table as a player and you bring this up to another player, I feel like you should not. Nobody should be getting heated. I get that maybe in character, maybe the doctor is like, I don't know, like Bones and Star Trek gonna get all like, come on, Spock, or whatever. But there's no reason why the player should get heated. You could have a good spirited discussion in character, but you should be able to put it out. The fact that escalated to me is really interesting. And if I'm the GM of that game, I'd want to figure out like what was the push button issue here? Because why is this person bringing up an ethical question getting X carded? Like that's if you're X carding something, that means it really is affecting you on a personal, emotional level. And this shouldn't be that. This shouldn't be fraught territory, I don't think. So if I'm the GM, I'd want to get with other players and say, okay, I understand you did that and this is fine, but let's suss this out a little bit, because what that person did, assuming they did it in a non, horrible way, right? They did it in an open sort of, I don't know, they weren't insulting anybody. They weren't calling, you're doing it in a sort of an, I don't know, non-threatening or whatever, just in a normal way. That should be okay. Right, it should be, but I get it. They X carded it, but I'd want to understand that as a GM. And then for this player, I'm not sure. I mean, I hope they get over it. I don't know. Maybe I don't. It's hard to say because you're reading on the internet. You don't know people. Like my gaming group historically, at least the one I played with for a long time, I mean, people had thick skin. I remember people getting, yelling and like people storming out and having to take 10-minute breaks. But then the next week, everyone was back at the table. Like nobody held this stuff. There was no grudges kept. I think we all had kind of thick skin. We all just sit there kind of like, well, F you, pal. And then next week we're just kind of bad at it, and back at it, I would say. And then something else would happen. And we were like, you know what? I'm tired of you, whatever. But then, you get over it. So I don't want to say that that's necessarily the best way to do it, or that everybody should be like we were, whatever. I mean, everyone's got their own things going on. But if I feel like as a GM, I would be concerned about that player if this is their response to that and they're not getting over it. I think I need to figure that out. I don't know what this player should do. I mean, part of me says like, you didn't do anything wrong. I mean, again, assuming everything was kind of handled in a non-dickish fashion, you didn't do anything wrong. So I'm not sure what, obviously just drop the ethics, drop the gun ethics bit. But other than that, like, I don't know what you did wrong. So I don't know what to tell you not to do. I feel like maybe that player is just having a moment in their life and you just got to kind of let it ride out for a little bit. Maybe not interact with them so much for a few sessions and see how things go. Hey, Squirrel Hermit. Let's see, the trolley problem. It is a bit of the trolley problem. Running over one ethics to save things from some other ethics. Round says, as a GM, you could change the way the gun works to get the same effect of enemies being stunned for a while and forgetting things without the drugs. That could be a response to the X card. Yeah, but I'm not sure that's. I mean, that could be it, right? We don't know. So there's a bunch we don't know. We don't know who came up with the effect of the gun. It could be, and I'm gonna guess that it's that player who came up with how the gun works, and that they thought in their brain, and this happens, right? You think, okay, I can't kill this or that. I got it. Hallucinogenic gun makes them forget for 10 minutes. And then you're really proud of it. You bring it out the table. And then everyone seems to be like, oh, yeah. And then there's that turd in the punch bowl. And I probably admit I've been the turd in the punch bowl where someone's like, I got this great idea. And then you're like, yeah, excuse me, pal. That sounds great on paper. But isn't this kind of bad also as a doctor? And then you're just mad, right? You're just like, I thought I had this and like, F you. And I don't want to engage in this. And you know what? Everyone else was good with my choice and what I did. And you're just, you're mucking it up. And I don't have an answer for you. I don't really have much of a yeah, but, or maybe I do, but it's, it's not shutting you up. So it just kind of escalates. That's what I feel like is. If it was a GM created effort, I mean, the thing is, if it was a GM created effort, then what you could do is as a player, you say, all right, well, okay, so here it comes out. So we have version 1 of the gun, version 1 of the knockout gun. Hallucinations, forget things for 10 minutes or whatever. I don't know. Why don't we want to call it pacifying gun? Let's call it. This thing happens where a player points out like, yeah, man, hallucinations, you're kind of driving a bit crazy. Doesn't seem that great. doesn't seem like it's something that would fit the doctor's code. And then you're like, hey man, it's better than killing them. And then the other guy's like, well, it may be better than killing them, I guess, but I don't know if I feel much better driving people crazy temporarily. Seems, can't we do something else? Then as a player, you go, well, let's work on version 2 of the gun. Okay, hey GM, I thought this was a great idea, but clearly this other player has shown something. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't like it, but you know what? Hey, can I alter the gun? Can I work on downtime, exploring some other options? So instead of hallucinating, I knock them out. And maybe you decided to hallucinate because then you could say that if you just knocked them and they fell over and fell asleep, maybe you're afraid they're going to fall and bang their heads and die, or fall off of ledges, or all kinds of stuff. Where if it's hallucinations, maybe you felt like we can control that a little bit, and then they'll still be moving around, so they're not going to suddenly jump off the spaceship or something, right? Whatever it is, and then you work on it. So I wouldn't just as a GM, to me, just fix it. Oh, fix it. I would want the players to work on it. But this, again, because of the X card, because it seems to be hitting somebody in a non-rational place. Maybe do that, maybe don't. I don't know, but I think as the GM, I'd be concerned if I just went ahead and changed it, that it would have a negative. That player would look at it like, if I did that, the player would think I was taking the other player's side, right? Well, let's just not make it hallucinations then, and I'll just change it so that's this way. Then the player who came up with it would be like, whoa, it just feels like you're piling on, like you're kind of saying in a way that, oh no, the other guy was right. They were right. I just don't want to, we'll just do that. So I don't think there's much. I mean, it's really the solution is really, as with most things, talk to your player, right? GM, get with your player and say at a game, in chat, away from the other folks, and say, hey, I just want to talk through this. I just want to make sure everything's all right and whatever. And hey, maybe you could float that idea. Hey, I can change the effect of the gun if you think that would help, or whatever it is. Do that. Hey, bullet catcher. Happy Friday as well. Glad you made it. The player could run out of ammo. Yeah, I'm not trying to. I think that Frederick, the issue is that this player had a big emotional response, not to the, just to the, I guess, to the disagreement on the nature of the gun. Ammunition, it running out of ammo wouldn't really solve anything, really. Maybe there might not be a solution, but probably, as what it usually is at the end of the day, is talk to your GMs, talk to your players. I mean, in terms of being more mature, as Fred said, grow up. Yeah, there's some of that, but I hate to say that because you don't know what someone's going through, and everyone's got those moments where you catch yourself and you're just way more invested in something than the people. I mean, I've gotten into heated arguments in the game about games before, and I know I would have been pissed off if me and somebody else is having this thing in the game, and somebody were to walk in, like a neighbor were to walk into my friend's apartment where we're playing and say like, hey man, grow up. I'd have been like, F you, pal. You don't know jack about Jack. So it's not, that doesn't really help anybody. It's, if you're in the moment, you're emotionally invested in it, caught up in it, grow up isn't gonna, oh, okay, thanks, my mature friend. Talk to your player. The GM really, I think, needs to kind of handle that. Or the other, or the other player needs to maybe, ideally that the mature thing would be the other player recognizes like, man, I made a kind of a mountain out of a molehill out of that. And you think about it in between sessions and you come back and say, hey man, I'm sorry. I'm not sure why it got to me, but it did. And go from there. But it seems like they just haven't done that. Oh, this is going to be good. So this is in the AD&D subreddit, which we don't hit very much. What are the most essential or just your favorite parts of the Wilderness Survival Guide? This is posted by Grill or Be Grilled. I've only just started scrolling through this book. My hard copy foolishly offloaded when I thought the newest edition would be what I'd play with my kids, but damn, it's packed and with classic Gygaxian clutter. Not actually written by Gygax, but I get the point. I don't think it is anyway. What parts of the book do you find yourself using the most? What parts do you adjust? What parts do you ignore? I mean, I just happened to scroll down and see FPH Demented here. And yeah, there's not much I use out of it. I mean, I love the book. I own the book. It's a fun tome, but it is so It is so. I should do it on stream once. I don't think I have a digital copy, but I can arrange. I can. If it's on, assuming it's on drive through, I can get a hold of it. Man, it's a lot of crunch, and I don't know for what. At the end of the day, it's got weather tables, but those weather tables are complicated, and people have found ways since whenever it was published in, I guess, the early 80s or so, or mid 80s, whenever it was, to make better tables or easier tables that get you most of the way there. Now it's probably more accurate, in quotes, to the kind of weather patterns and more sort of realistic, maybe towards Earth weather. I get that, but again, it's that how much is it worth to you to get to that granular? Like, one, does it matter? Does it matter how close to kind of Earth norms and different regions the weather is? Like, how much, like, how close do you need or want to get? Do you want to get 98% of the way there? Do you want to get 90% of the way? Or do you want to get 75% of the way there? And for me, I think that 75% ish is fine, because you just want to get enough that no one's going like, wow, this weather makes no sense at all. It's just like, okay, I can deal with it. Like, that's kind of all you want. More than that, I think it's just, if you want to, go for it, but I don't think you need it. You kind of just want that impression of weather that makes sense. And so the weather tables in there, you could do it, but it's complicated. And I've seen simpler ones, including when we looked at what did we look at just the other day? I think it wasn't Dragonbane. It wasn't Dragonbane, was it? That had really cool. Oh no, it was Harn. We looked at Harn World, and Harn World had a kind of interesting but sort of simplified kind of this weather. It was sort of, each season had a column, and you just go up and down the rows of the column depending, and it would just bounce, and it would give you kind of good weather. And it seemed like I was actually impressed. It was like, wow, this is kind of an easier system than I anticipated there being in this book. I expected something more like Wilderness Survival. And then you have tons of stuff in there, and if you need to look something up, you got some good stuff. But it is super crunchy, and as PH Demented is saying, it's an interesting read, and it can stir up some ideas, but the rules in it are almost universally too clunky or complicated to be of practical use at the table. Yep, and that's what I would. And then Sustel 73 points out that the Wilderness Survival Guide isn't Gygaxian at all. It's actually written after he was forced out. Yeah, I knew it wasn't written by him. I didn't know the timing. Someone else points out, what parts do you ignore? All of it. I mean, I don't want to be harsh on it, because they're fun books. I don't regret owning it. I enjoy it. It's great, but it's one of those books that I enjoy reading through and seeing more than I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pull this out of the table. It's just too much. I mean, it's the kind of thing that if I could see, if you could take the tables, let's say for weather generator, and put them in an automated little web app, great, because then you just get the result. You put in a little couple things, time of year, whatever, boom, and you get it, and not have to roll out all that stuff. But it's fun to have around. Let's see. Bullet Catcher says, was a lot of crunch back then when it was in use before the convenience of technology and the internet. Yes, I think, this is where I would love, VTTs and those things to have these kind of generators built in, where you can get super kind of crazy granular on the generator itself, but it's all coded behind the scenes, and all you have as a player, GM, or on the front end is just to hit the little like boop button. And I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I assume that Fantasy Grounds, Roll20, they all have, someone's built some kind of weather generator for them, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't use them, but and this is oolong tea with a little mint and chrysanthemum for the working man. Hey, Ian. Dude says, very true. Wilderness Survival Guide has normal and max weight load, stamina rates for like every monster. Each type of dragon has its own in the book. Yeah, it's like, do you need all that? I mean, it's fun. It's kind of interesting. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Neat to read, but do I want to try to implement all this stuff? No. I mean, I would love to have seen. I kind of wonder with some of these books of this era, and there's the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide, which is similar, but below ground, that they're kind of neat reads. But did they really go through and play test these in a way where, like, no, we're going to try to set up a table where we're going to put all this stuff in action, and of course, as Paul pointed out, pre-internet, pre-all things, and we're going to be doing it manually, just paper and slide rules and abacuses and all that stuff, calculators. I don't think it's really workable Phil says, looking at the options instead of a hidden list that's picked from randomly has a very different feel. Just seeing options creates inspiration. It does, Phil. If you want, I mean, you can read through, if you look through those tables, and unfortunately my book's in another room, I can't get to it to pull out to look. But the tables aren't particularly inspirational because it's all, it's, you got to kind of go through it and you'll get to something. Like, it's not like a cool pivot table or something more modern that you can get inspiration from. Like, I really, with that kind of table, I really just do want, no, just give me the weather or give me whatever. Like, it's, and the process is too long to get through. No, Soren says they both like and dislike that survival guide. Yes, I think there's a lot of people who have kind of, they love it. You know, nostalgia is strong in there, but not great for usability. Oh, Edwards Books likes the starvation rules and endurance stuff. But it is interesting. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely, to Phil's point, reading through it, you'll certainly get some inspiration. But I don't know. I don't think I'd want to play it as is. That's kind of where you pick through it and you go, oh, wow, this is cool, but maybe I can just simplify this way down or make it into something that's easier and then use that as opposed to trying to use it as is. Hey, RPG Grandma says, yeah, you got to pick and choose what to use or not to use. Just because you got a table doesn't mean you have to use it. Yes. That is most definitely true. Oh, let's see. Anything? Oh, we got 31 days of solo RPG tools in one long article. I may have to look at this one since I've been starting to solo play. So I kind of feel like I need to read this. Oh, this was from March. Oh, let's give it a quick peek. Is it a really long article? Rand Roll. I might have to save this. I don't know if it's worth going through this because I'd want to go through. Maybe I'll do this as its own stream. Go through and look at all of these because it seems really good, but I feel like I'd want to read and go to the actual generators and mess around them, and I don't want to hijack this stream. So I will save that for later. But nice find. I will save that in case I lose my bookmark. Oh, you know what? I don't think I set it to the new tab. Goblin Punch posted this. Let's see. Control plus. All right, so this is called the Underclock, and this is at goblinpunch.blogspot.com/24/04/the-underclock-fixing-random-encounter. All right, the Underclock, fixing the random encounter. For a long time, I had the same random encounter table rules as everyone else. Every 3 rooms with 30 minutes of exploration time, roll a d6. If a 1 comes up, a random encounter happens. After a couple of years, I even added, if a 2 comes up, the players get an omen, a clue about an upcoming encounter. In practice, this never quite felt the way that I wanted it to, and it's taken me a decade, but I think I know why. First, look at the math. This works out to 1 random encounter every 18 rooms and 1 omen every 18 rooms. We probably got 4 to 10 rooms per session, so random encounters don't pop up very often. I don't use a lot of empty spaces. Most of my rooms have something to interact with. Some people roll a random encounter every room, including every long hallway. This feels a lot better, but it also means that back-to-back encounters are not infrequent, and it feels too unpredictable. Second, look at how omens are supposed to work. You're supposed to find the omen, which A, builds suspense, and B, lets the players prepare themselves prior to the encounter itself. Omens weren't happening with enough frequency. Third, consider the stated goal of random encounters: time pressure, verisimilitude. Random encounters are not the best way to achieve either of those. Often, when random encounters occurred, they felt disruptive. Anyway, I'm giving up on tracking torch durations, random encounter checks. I think I have something better. All right, we'll see. Design goals, time pressure. The 4 most vital currencies in a dungeon crawler are time, information, hit points, and expendables. It doesn't feel like a dungeon crawler to me unless all 4 of those things matter. The reason why we track torch depletion and random encounters is because we want a source of time pressure. I like games where time is a critical resource. Players can't read every book and tap every brick. They need to be tactical in where they spend their attention. This is good. It raises the skill level for dungeon crawling and makes players scrutinize my dungeon for clues. Do they have reason to think there's a hidden door in this room? If so, they'll spend some time searching. If not, keep moving. But I don't think random encounters are very good at this task. Random encounters don't put much time pressure on players unless they're very frequent, and at higher frequencies, 1 per room or greater, they feel too uncontrolled to me. Suspense versus surprise. So surprise is when the alien suddenly attacks. Suspense is when you know the aliens are getting closer. You are running out of time and you're running out of ammo. I think that most DMs want their players to feel suspense more than surprise. A truly random roll, a flat 1 in 6 chance, doesn't offer much suspense. Surprise, but not suspense. To increase suspense, you want the players to feel like they're running out of time. Verisimilitude. I'd also argue that random encounters don't do much to make a dungeon feel like a living, breathing place. Random encounters frequently feel out of place, especially when they're not well localized to the story and the rooms around them. Time pressure. Random encounters are meant to be attacks on character time. Don't dawdle in the dungeon or you'll lose HP, but they often feel like taxes on player time. Don't dawdle in the dungeon or you'll be stuck in some pointless combat for 45 minutes when everyone would have more fun with 45 minutes of exploring new rooms. If the only goal was to put time pressure on the players, you could replace all random encounters with a cold wind that deals 1d6 damage to everyone, save for half, then moves on. The players are still penalized for taking too long, and then everyone can get back to dungeoneering. These last 2 points are really just complaints about how the random encounters are written rather than the mechanic that produces the events. I'm including them only out of a sense of completion. Oh, this is long. All right. Oh, Ian liked this one a lot. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with everything so far, but I'm not going to stop and tear things apart. Because I think one thing, and we could probably get to it maybe at the end when we see the whole point, is there seems to be this assumption that's being made that all random encounters are hostile, and they're not. And but again, he does mention that part of it is how they're written, but I don't know, for a lot of OSR stuff, they're not really written very much. So it's kind of up to you as the GM to sort of write them out yourself. But let's keep going and we can cover, I want to get through their whole point, and then we can start to look at some of the different aspects of what's being said. The underworld. The underworld is not just a basement or a cave. The underworld is a place that hates you. It is hostile architecture. It hates you in a way that only the blind tonnage of stone and cold air can have. It hates your lively blood. It hates the sunshine warmth still lingering on your skin. Live there long enough and the underworld can learn to tolerate you. You will grow pale and cold and strange, like the other inhabitants of that place. The long years will render you smooth and inoffensive, like a pearl held in the mouth. The underworld's irritation fades and scabs over. But this doesn't apply to delvers. They dig greedily and they dig fast. They are hated the most, and this hatred is felt as soon as the underworld is entered. Explorers have a myriad of names for this feeling of supernatural dread. The claws of the underworld, the black rat whisper, the Phasidra. But only one name suits our purposes here, the underclock. It starts at 20 when you walk into a dungeon. When it reaches 0, an encounter happens. You will periodically roll a 6-sided underworld die and subtract it from the underclock whenever the party expends time or noise. Examples of actions that provoke an underclock roll: exploring a new room, including long hallways, moving through 3 already explored rooms, lingering or searches, making noise. Note, the noise of combat doesn't normally contribute to the underclock. Some more facts about the underclock. The underworld die explodes. If you get the maximum value, e.g. a 6 on a d6, immediately roll it again and subtract the result from the underclock. If the underclock drops below 0, an encounter is triggered. After the encounter resolves, the underclock resets to 20. If the underworld clock, I guess they meant, probably forgot to update all these. If the underclock equals 0 exactly, it resets to 3. The underworld's attention is elsewhere momentarily. If the underclock equals 3 exactly, a shadowing event occurs. So the clock reaches 0, it bounces up to 3, and a shadowing event occurs. These are just omen spore clues, more or less. Rests. You can rest at any time. You'll get all your HP back after you do. There are 3 prices. 1, the first cost is time. You'll have to roll some underclock rolls. If you're resting in the middle of a well-traveled location, make 3 rolls. If you're in a secret room that no one else knows about, you don't need to make any rolls. If everything in between is either 1 or 2 rolls. These rolls explode normally. If you are interrupted by an encounter, you'll need to start over. 2, the second cost is a ration. Cross it off your inventory. The third cost is attention. Each time you rest in the dungeon, increase the size of your underclock die, d6, d8, d10, d12, d20. Each time you spend a night sleeping on the surface, decrease the underworld die by 1 size down to a minimum of d6. Each time you spend a night sleeping, oh, I see. Okay, so basically as you leave, it calms down. That's kind of a nice effect. Everyone knows that you shouldn't eat anything in the underworld. Degeneration. The underworld hoards its treasures. It hates the idea of its gold returning to the surface. Far better that the treasure remain in the possession of one of its inhabitants, someone who will carry the gold until it dies in another dark corner. Whenever you leave the dungeon degenerates. Things may change, the dungeon may restock, but most critically, the treasure depletes. Every time the player exits to the outside, the biggest treasure pile in the dungeon loses 20% of its value, stolen away by agents of the underworld. Sometimes this is an elder dungeon spirit, sometimes this is just a goblin with a boot full of loose coinage. And then we have integration with other systems. The underclock replaces torch depletion and other random encounters. The party still needs one lit torch for every 3 adventurers. Everyone gets -1 initiative for every person not sufficiently illuminated. The maximum underclock value is reduced by 1 for every point of encumbrance held by a member of the party. I'm just pouring myself a little bit more tea here. The underclock replaces regular duration of spells. 30 minutes equals 3 exploration turns equals 3 points, or equals 10 points on the underclock. Discussion takes an average of 5.9 underclock rolls to generate an encounter. There's a 0.3 chance of an underworld clock generating an encounter in a single roll. Really is a series of exploding d6s. This is roughly comparable to the old 1 in 6 encounter chance every 10 minutes. Encounters are shadowed approximately 33% of the time. The other 67% of the time, they are not preceded by any shadowing. I do love this countdown, which makes the time pressure feel much more palatable at the table. I would say you've been in this dungeon for 3 hours now, and no one would care. I would roll a random encounter check, and players would glance over. But people pay more attention to the underclock. Yes, of course, the players will be more cautious when the clock is low, and bolder when the clock is fresh. That's kind of the point. Oh my gosh, there's so much more. Oh, I see. Okay, so the rest of it's comments and stuff. So, all right, so my overall thoughts. It's funny because I've been actually thinking about something similar. Not my one of the things that I really liked. So let me rewind a bit. Last week, when I looked at Dragonbane and I decided, oh look, I'll use these solo rules. Something that really struck me that I liked was this concept of threat. If you watch through the streams or was playing the adventure, there was this looming threat of these goblins. What was it? They were going to ambush. Goblins ambushing me in this underworld location. And when things happened, the counter would go down. And when it got down, the goblins would attack. And I like that a lot. And I've been thinking about how I can take that and harness it in other places. I did like it. So it's interesting that then this underclock concept comes up because they're on similar kind of wavelengths. This has more randomization type stuff thrown in. The other one was more of a steady, like I know that if I do this thing that I might need to do, the clock's going down. Or that that ticking clock concept, the threat is getting closer and closer and closer. So it's interesting. And I think there's some interesting things to do with it. I don't necessarily love it for myself as it is explained here. I think I don't know if it needs all the rolling. I kind of like the idea that it's kind of steady. It's looming and it comes, right? It's coming. For me, I wouldn't replace torches and other things with the clock. And I think it's almost separate from wandering monsters. Now, again, maybe this speaks to their angle, right? They don't call it wandering monsters or wandering creatures. They're saying random encounters. Which seems to me they're looking at everything as being hostile. And I don't know, and I don't have the context around this is just how they play with their random encounters or whatnot. But the problem with this system, as it stands, replacing all that stuff, is you lose out on all the neutral and positive and kind of unknown encounters. Because this system is clearly towards something hostile is coming to you, at you, and it's going to come at some point. And then it's variable when that point is. And sometimes you might get a clue what it is, sometimes you don't. And that's fine when they're hostile forces. But oftentimes, at least in my game and other games, you have encounters that are not necessarily hostile. They might be neutral. You might be feeling each other out, especially when you're in these sort of not in like if you're in the goblin lair and you're hacking and slashing new goblins, sure, most of the goblins are probably going to be hostile. But if you're in kind of your mythic underworld location, something like, let's say, somewhere in I don't know, the caverns of Thracia, where you have these different factions, different things are going on, and not everybody's hostile to you. Not everybody really cares what you're doing. They're doing their own thing. Then you're losing a lot of that interesting interactions because you've determined that, oh no, we're just going to have this kind of negative hostile thing counting down on you. So I don't love that. Now, it's not to say you couldn't use them both in some way. Maybe you just have a role that's just for you have a threat and you have a wandering creature. And it's kind of what I've been struggling with as I've been thinking about trying to take the threat from the solo game and integrate it into non-solo play, was dealing with things that aren't necessarily hostile. Like, one, do I call it threat if the threat ends up being a kindly old man or goblin, something else? Like, what is it? Is it a threat then? Is it something else? It's just kind of this, it's an unknown that's looming out there. It's coming. Or do you just have that for hostile things? No, Soren says they like the degeneration aspect. That would take the players time to figure that out. I have to say, I'm not sure I like that either. And the reason is that part of the thing with dungeons that I want to encourage is players trying to figure it out, puzzle through it over time. And this seems to be punishing that, because if you leave and the piles decrease, then you're essentially telling your party that you better get it as quickly as possible. And I don't feel the need to punish them like that. I want them to hit something in the dungeon they can't figure out, they're having trouble with, and then go back to town and say, we're going to come back later and solve you. And they come back later and solve that. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah, they thought this was be the big pile of treasure. And I'm like, well, now it's half that. It just feels like a bummer. And I don't know what it's supposed to teach the players. To me, it's the wrong lesson, which is like, no, we better get it all now. And then we're never coming back because it's going to deplete. It's like, not for me. I mean, it's, I'm sure there's in different people's games, different things, but I want to encourage my players to repeat visits to the dungeon. And that seems to kind of take the wind out of that. It seems like you want to get everything first, because then every week or however long you're away, other things happen. Then it's just becoming less and less. There's less and less reason for you to go. So why? And I don't want to encourage that. I don't want to encourage dungeons to be like, yeah, we got to hit it now, hit it fast, and then we're gone. So I would not use that. And so I like it in general. Like I said, I feel like it's interesting that they have thought this through a lot more. I don't like the idea that the players know about the underclock. I just like that they know that there's some kind of I would rather they just know generally that there's some kind of looming shadow than have specifically know when it is. And I also would want to bake in, because I also agree that it's good. And part of my thinking was not just applying that concept of threat into dungeons, but also in the wilderness. And I like the idea of the foreshadowing, getting that sort of interesting bit. But I think a third is maybe not as much as I would want. I might just want that kind of surprise thing. If you're not surprised, then you get some more information, you get that context. And then often that works out in my games anyway, because I often roll, and I usually will, if they're not surprised, I tend to go with longer distances. And then, so in my wandering creature kind of check, part of that omen type is kind of baked in, because oftentimes the enemies will be at 60, 90, 120 feet, which when I'm looking at the dungeon map, right, it's not in view. So then what is the party experiencing if they're not surprised, but the monster's at 100 feet away, and 100 feet is around 3 corners or in a room? It's that omen quality. So I actually use that sort of foreshadowing a lot. And so a third is probably not as much as I'd like. But I do think there's some interesting things in here. And as I'm fooling around with that threat concept, there's probably some things to use in here. But I don't think I myself would use it as is. Kyle says that they say at the beginning that they're rolling for random encounters every 3 rooms. That seems significantly less than every few turns with players searching rooms. I don't know if they said specifically. They say, well, every 3 rooms or 30 minutes of exploration time. So they kind of give both. Rylan says the fear of the unknown can be a better motivator. Yeah, and I don't want them to think too much. I know he was saying here that he doesn't mind if they are bolder and then not. That's fine. Like that doesn't really bother me. I just like that. To me, it's part of that being in the world of the characters and not being like you're playing a board game where you could see the timer ticking down. And when you're playing solo, you just have to. That's just one of those things you have to do. Like as a player, I would rather not know about the threat, or just know that it's there and then have some kind of die or something. And maybe I can even change the threat that I like the idea that of the degeneration part where you essentially have a usage die that's depleting, and maybe with the threat, I could see a way to make it more random so that I, as a player, don't know. But when you're playing solo, you just kind of have to make some adjustments with the fact that you're kind of GMing and solo, and you're playing at the same time. So you're going to know some things that you would rather not know, but you kind of know them anyway. And I put the threat number in sort of that realm. Maybe there's a better way to do it where it's not totally known, but whatever. But when I'm playing with a GM, those are the kind of things that, as a GM, I think is part of that behind the screen magic. The players, you're just getting hints and things, and because that's probably how I would play. Is the closer you get as your die size decreases, or you're reaching close to zeros, that's when the context start to build up. Like in that game, it didn't. Turns out I didn't have to do anything, but in my solo foray, there was one point where we got it was more of sort of a set dressing bit about drums in the deep. You can hear drums, boom, 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 boom in the distance. That to me, ideally, would be like if you're say, to use their term, your underclock reaching 0 is goblins ambushing you. Then when it's below 10, you're hearing drums somewhere. You don't know where. Then when it hits 5, you've got some other thing happening. So then you really get the suspense of, oh gosh, I hear drums in the distance. What's happening? Then maybe you hear rushing feet, or your vibration as things are running towards you. Oh my gosh, right? That's how I would do it, and like really bake that in, and not just have it on like the number 3. Suddenly you get something, and other times you don't. If you really want to work in that suspense, which I totally am down with, I would just bake it in and make it have a lot more fun with that. RBG Grandma says, not everything players run into the dungeon needs to be deadly or unhelpful. Yes, and that's the other thing, which I said earlier on, is you lose that. And I've had a lot of fun with players encountering stuff that isn't hostile in the dungeon, or that is maybe it's wary. And there's just a lot of that gray area between it. You have this whole reaction roll that you could make, right? And this one is basically, this method is saying that essentially all your encounters are like you've rolled 2 on your reaction roll, and there's attack on sight. And you're losing all that granularity because you're only looking at that narrow part of it, which is like, these are the things that just want to kill you. These are the things, all these things that don't. And I like using them even for creatures too. Maybe you run into some giant centipedes, but they just ate something. So they're like lazy and they're slow and they're like, just leave me alone kind of thing. Like, I really like to have fun with that. So for me, there are tons of encounters that are not, most of them are not outright just attack on sight. Even when you're running into folks that are kind of hostile, there's that sort of standoff moment, who goes there, what's your business kind of thing. And granted, you could probably, some of that you could say, oh yeah, on the encounter, but it kind of, I don't know, it feels like that there's sort of, in some ways, throwing away the baby with the bathwater on that, which, it's everyone's, and of course the other thing, it's all going to be stylistic. I play my game in a certain way and they play their game in a certain way, but there's some intriguing thoughts there. Tomato Hate Tomato says D100 with changing threshold is better. Consecutive D6s adding up to 20 means the first rolls are safe. It can be tomato, but they do, remember, the D6s explode, so there are small chances that you could roll 6 and 6 and a 6, and suddenly you rolled 18 on the 20. So you got that. And then it did say the die sizes could increase in certain situations, right? I think that was if you were resting in the dungeon. Was that each time you rest in the dungeon, you increase your underclock die, right? But it does start at a D6. But then if this is your second foray in the dungeon, it might actually start at D10. So, but yes, on default it's a D6, but and you could always situationally raise the die size. RBG Grandma says you can have situations in dungeons where if they leave, they fail. And so once the party is committed to delving and not leaving quickly, then the situation, the dungeon must support that situation dungeon must support long term. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance I think you can have talk there, right? But I think just for me, while there might be that situation where you're trapped or you got to do something, or for the most part, I want the players to be able to leave and come back. And I want to encourage them to leave and come back. Hey, if you're stuck, leave and come back. Not you're stuck, you leave, and now, oh yeah, but the longer you're gone, the more the dungeon's degrading. So all that treasure you're looking for, it's all just floating away. It's dissolving into the ether. That to me is discouraging them from leaving and coming back. And I don't want to do that. At least the pace of my games, the deadliness and all that blah blah blah. I'm not interested in trying to push them to go further. Let's see. Ian says tying the underclock die to the awareness of the dungeon. I think that's why if you rest, it becomes aware. You could probably have other things that increase the die size also. I mean, the thing is, you could really tweak this die size bit to really customize how you want your game. They make a point of combat not upping the die, right? Combat has no effect. It's the weird, I don't know, and I'm not sure why. I think I'd want combat to affect this, because in this at least initial conception, combat doesn't actually alter anything. Noise doesn't, nothing happens. I would say if you get into combat, this die size increases. So that gives you a reason to want to be stealthy and not just fight everything, right? Because the other way, it seems like it almost encourages you to fight in some way. At least in terms of fighting being safe, a safe action to commit in terms of the clock, which I wouldn't want to do. So intriguing ideas. Let me know if you end up using this. I'm curious what your how it'll work. Like I said, I'm not going to use this as is, but in terms of how I've been thinking about this threat counter meter type thing, this gives me some ideas. I still want to figure out a way to kind of work in the threat potentially with non-hostile things, but I'm not sure how to do that. Maybe it just has to be two separate things. I don't know. RPG Grandma says that fighting dungeon would know. Yes, but he specifically says, or they specifically say in terms of the mechanics, that that's not how the system works, which is, I agree with you. It should. They for some reason, and they don't. So I don't know. But it was a really neat idea. And thanks to Goblin Punch for writing it. And then we see I only got one more thing. Ian asked if I got this from Reddit or the feedback site. I got it from Reddit. He posted it 26 minutes ago to ROSR. And look, let's go on ROSR just to end. So we got the underclock. No, Sorian says, how much does the party know the dungeon versus how much does the dungeon know the party? Yeah, that's a good question. So is this a question? I'm not sure. It seems like it's a question, even though I thought it was pitched as advice, but it's traps, avoiding the hidden random pit trap. And this is posted by Mark SN to the OSR subreddit. I've heard many times the sage advice of one must not have traps that are just roll a second save, roll a save, or take 3d6 damage. One should try for a trap that telegraphs danger and becomes an obstacle to work around. So I think I get it, but how do I work in the age-old hidden pit trap? If they walk along without searching, bang, they get a save, or it's down they go. I could make it that they get a spot hidden roll moments before, but isn't this random as well? So how do I telegraph something that should be hidden, or how I just missed the point of these wise words? Probably a little bit of both. I'm going to read the comments first. So Alex of Barbaria says, the telegraphing is the longish, featureless hallway stretching before you. Ideally you'd think so, but there are lots of those, and they don't, and probably, I wouldn't say that that's the universal symbol for a pit trap. They can happen anywhere. So I guess the comments are getting quite involved. So here's what I'll go. I looked at a 4th edition dungeon ages ago now. And one of the things that they did for telegraphing pit traps was they actually had the first pit trap. The first area that had a pit trap in it was exposed. The trap had been triggered by somebody else. So you could see it. And you could, if you were thinking, try to note the context of this trap. Then later on, you find the context and you don't find an open pit trap. Aha, might be a pit trap. There's also part of that wisdom is really to not have hidden pit traps to begin with. You have the pit trap, it's obvious. It becomes, how do you get around a pit trap that's 10 feet by 10 feet, has the spreads the, goes the pressure plate is the length of the floor, whatever, however it is, it's like that is the obstacle. And it could even be open. Oh, you have an open pit here. Excuse me. How do you get around it? That just could be the thing. You don't have to have hidden pit traps. Yes, it's sort of a trope, but you don't have to engage with it. And part of that wisdom, if you're following that, is to essentially you don't have them. You have them be things that are just out obvious obstacle you need to get around. I think you can have a little bit of both, and I like that approach. And in terms of dungeons, it makes sense because if there's a pit trap near the entryway, it makes sense that somebody would have triggered it before you guys show up, unless you have people in there or creatures who are resetting the traps all the time. But often, hey, maybe the trap, it triggers, it opens, but then because it's old, rusted, whatever, it doesn't close, or doesn't close all the way, or it's sitting open, or maybe somebody was kind of partly impaled on the stakes at the bottom, but they managed to get their spear up and kind of gummed up the works. Whatever it is, it's open. And if it's near the entrance, you can kind of play that into the fact that this place has been maybe plundered a little bit. And then further down, when you get past into the parts that seem to be more pristine and untampered with, unmolested, then you can have similar context, and now the trap is hidden. I like that approach a lot. And that's probably what I would do there. And you, of course, doesn't have to be just pit traps. You can do that with any kind of trap or mechanism or anything, right? You show, oh, look here, there's a secret door between two statues and it was jammed open. And okay, somebody found that earlier. Then later on in the dungeon, there are two statues and there's just wall. Is that just a wall? Is that a secret door? And then, of course, you can also play with flipping the context around. Maybe in one case, there's two statues and a gap between there and it's a secret door, but it's actually a trap meant to get people who always are thinking there's secret doors everywhere. Have some fun with it. Nick asked if it was one of the Moldvay books that had you roll to see if the trap falls. Yes, I don't think it's just in the Moldvay books, but yes, that was the other thing. I didn't get into that because it didn't seem to be germane, but yeah, usually there was you would roll to see if you actually triggered the trap. And I think that was to simulate the fact that not everyone steps on the pressure plate. You might just walk over it, or the pressure plate, everything is kind of old and not necessarily in the best condition. So maybe you hit the pressure plate, you don't happen to trigger it, but maybe you step on it and kind of jars it loose and gets the dust out. And then the next person steps on it and down it goes. But yes, there was that as well. Ryland says they had the idea of calling a dungeon the high stakes dungeon and then have a lot of tall spikes and pit traps, i.e. high stakes. Haha, nice. Play on words. Ryland saying having traps as visible or broken down sounds like a great idea. In fact, it makes sense to find a bunch of rundown objects. It does. And it gives the party those clues, hopefully they would take, so that if, let's say, in the first room of the dungeon, there's an open pit trap and the floor has some kind of checkerboard pattern, you hope that later on when you're like, okay, you're coming into the front of this room and then the floor has a checkerboard pattern, they're going, whoa, wait a minute. We saw this before. There's a pit trap. Let me search for traps here. Yeah, something like that. This dungeon, and I wish I could remember the name of it, did a really good job of it. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Oh, it's Revenge of the Iron Lich. Revenge of the Iron Lich. That I looked back 2 years ago. Geez, yeah, a little bit over 2 years ago on the channel. That was the name of the dungeon. It's a 4th edition dungeon, but it really is a good dungeon, and it does a really good job with this interesting uses of traps and sort of traps that expose kind of hidden passageways, traps, and it did a lot of good. It had a lot of good stuff in there. So as a read, even if you have no desire to play 4th edition or no whatever, I feel like it was a worthy read. It's called, I think it was, I don't think it's a first party dungeon, but I don't remember what it's called. Revenge of the Iron Lich. So check that out for some cool inspiration. Tomato says, depending on the type of dungeon, here has a history with traps. You could have frescoes depicting the danger, i.e. traps, as a foreboding element. You could. I mean, there are lots of things you could do. I might want to ask, like, well, why are they doing that, right? Why are you, unless there's a couple of reasons why I could think about it, but that's the only thing I want to think about is, well, why are they doing that? Is it something like this was done for safety purposes? Like we buried it, like, I saw on a program that was really interesting a long time ago now, but the gist of it was that you're talking about where you're burying, say, nuclear radioactive waste. And you're trying to come up with symbology you can use to warn people to stay the heck away from it. But you can't assume that they're going to understand our symbology. So the concept is that we need to bury this stuff for thousands of years because of the radiation. Maybe we'll have a Thundar the Barbarian incident where the Earth will get cracked in two and also will happen, and people will have forgotten. Our collective cultures will all vanish from the face of the earth, and some new folks will rise, and they'll find the ashes of what we've done, and they're going to stumble on this area. What kind of symbol can we put up to say, hey, don't go here? And that was kind of neat. And you could think about that in that kind of case, helping it. Other cases, I don't know if it would make sense for the frescoes to warn where the traps are, because generally the traps are there for the folks who, they don't want around. So why would you warn the interlopers that there's a trap? RPG says the OSHA goblin. Yep. Though, yeah, you could have like hobo marks, kind of adventure marks where somebody came through before and put some kind of mark like treasure, like a trap is there. Though adventurers seem to me to be the bunch that would not really want to warn other adventurers what's there, at least if they're going to come back. I feel like they want to keep those secrets themselves. But that's, of course, where you can find the corpse with the partial map, and the partial map has marks that they meant for themselves, but then they didn't make it because they fell into the pit trap, and then you get the trap. You get the map off the corpse in the trap. And I think actually that Revenge of the Iron Lich has something like that, where if you go down into the pit trap and you examine the poor dude's body that's down there, you actually get some kind of clue or something. I seem to recall. All right, folks. Well, we are past time. So thanks everybody for hanging out. If you could give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you found yourself in here and not subscribed and you feel like subscribing, that would also be awesome. Feel free to send me your stuff. If you have things you'd like us to look at, I end up trolling Reddit by default because people post a lot of stuff there, but I would love to get stuff directly from you in the community to check out, but I don't get any. So I end up going to Reddit. I would much rather get stuff directly. So if you have stuff that you're interested in, or even if it's not yours, you just think like, hey, this is interesting, and maybe it didn't make it, got buried on Reddit, or no one posted to Reddit, or you found it somewhere. It could be old, could be new, could be yellow, could be blue. Throw it my way. I'm happy to take a look at it, right? But other than that, folks, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody, and I'll talk to you later. Hey, Rylan, I know you said Pathfinder 2e. I'm fine to look at Pathfinder 2e stuff. I did that look at the quick start rules, but I'm all right to look at that stuff. So send it my way. Oh, Ian, you posted on the forum and I got it from Reddit. That's hilarious. Well, there you go. It got to me one way or another. You sent it my way, and so that's how it piqued my interest. All right, folks. Game on, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.